Entrusted with the deepest and most dangerous history of the Dark Angels chapter, these elite warriors work tirelessly to maintain the chapter's honour. In this video, we'll be uncovering the secrets of the Inner Circle Companions, and I'll also be demonstrating to you how we can achieve a wide range of surface finish variation across our whole miniature. Hey guys, what's going on? Nate the Feral Painter here, and in this video I'm going to be showing you how I created my Inner Circle Companions. So if you're not sure about the Inner Circle Companions, obviously from the Dark Angels chapter, and they first started to appear in the new Lionel Johnson booklet Comeback, where he returns in that, and then you get to sort of see the start of these guys, and I were really encapsulated by the lore that surrounded them. But when the miniatures came out, they just didn't quite cut it for me, and I really wanted to explore the actual lore and try and incorporate that into more of a Grimdark miniature and more in line with what I envisioned them to look like. So to start with, for me the Inner Circle Companions have these ancient heroic knight armors, which obviously leans more into the 40k universe, which we can do that by kitbashing it with some of the new Reclusians from Age of Sigmar, and that's the kit that I used for this, one of the Reclusians, and then we're going to kitbash it into more and combine it with the Inner Circle Companions. But to start to do that, we can use the Inner Circle Companions kit itself and combine it with this Reclusian. You can also achieve this with just some general spares that you might have lying around from your Space Marine kits, but it's the pose that I'm really trying to encapsulate, and for me I wanted this stoic pose with his arms outstretched in a Christ pose, but it can also read as menacing at the same time, but having that air of calm about him. But he's got his hands open, which it might seem inviting, but with the way that we compose the hands and the wrists, it can also, when you're putting your arms out to stop someone coming forward, as these guys eventually do become the Lion's Guard, they're protecting the lion himself, and I want to try and encapsulate that, you're coming no further. And it's just a case of finding a pose that works for you and one that fits within this story and the narrative that you're trying to tell. Now at this point, it's just a case of adding some relics to this miniature, and I still wanted him to make him look a little bit more mysterious, and that's why I've added some candles and skulls in and around him. And to obviously lean more in towards the 40k universe, I've also added some green stuff pipes. I also glued some bits to the base as well, and stay tuned to the end of this video as I'll show you how I painted up my base as well. But if you want to learn more about the greening and the pipes and the kit bashing, and also how to create a cathedral city ruined base, then make sure you check out our Dark Angels course over on the Grimdark Compendium. But at this point now, all I'm going to do is prime up my miniature, and this will give me an overall everything's the same colour, there's nothing that's standing out, and at this point I can really scrutinise the miniature and see if there's any changes or anything that I need to add to the mini. Now the colour scheme that I wanted for this Inner Circle Companions, I wanted to pay homage what came before, which was the classic black and red colour scheme, but also nod towards the new green armour, especially the new green Lionel Johnson armour, where it's almost black but it's got a hint of green inside it. So I'll quickly go over the base coat and the colour recipe, and again all these can be found in the description below, but it's just a case of getting some reds and greens and your silvers and golds down. It's a really easy base coat scheme, but for this I used AK Deep Red and a highlight of Mephiston Red, and then once I'd blacked out all the armour, I came in with Incubi Darkness, and this for me is a really nice perfect colour to get that almost black towards the green. And again, I'm only spraying this from above and hitting the highlight points, so all the shadows are in black and then the highlights are done in the Incubi Darkness. And once you've got all your miniature base coated out, we can now now start to knock back that green armour a little bit and push it back more towards that black colour armour, and for this I've used Abtalon 502's Smoke. I've applied it very thinly, removing about 99% of the pigment off my brush, and I've used like an overbrushing scrubbing technique, and because it is an oil paint I can come back in with some mineral spirits and a Q-tip and just remove it where I need to be. Now at this stage we're ready for our unifying wash, and for this we're going to be using Villainy Inks Goons Grime. Now in our previous video we spoke a little bit about Goons Grime, the ways you can apply it and ways that you can remove it, but in this video I want to get a bit more into a more specific application which is going to fit right into our Space Marine. So for this armour I wanted it to make it look really like dusty and really lived in, and to achieve that what I'm going to be doing is applying it through an airbrush. Now to start with, when it comes to like using an airbrush for it, I always recommend that you give these balls a really good shake. If you have access to a vortex mixer then that is a bonus. Now I do mix this in a 1:1 ratio in my airbrush, so if I'm going to use 6 drops of Villainy Inks Goons Grime I'm going to add 6 drops of mineral spirits, and once that's mixed up and in my airbrush I start to apply it in and around my miniature. Now as you start to work your way around, some of that mineral spirits is going to flash off and it's going to immediately start to dry. Now that's a bonus for this application that I'm going to be talking about, because I want to build it up even thicker, and I'm applying multiple layers of this Goons Grime through my airbrush, because it's going on in nice thin and even coats. I'm going to get the best results that I can when we come to the removal process. Again, this can be done via a brush application, it just means that when it comes to the removal phase there's just a little bit more of the manipulation that we need to do when it comes to the Goons Grime and taking it back off. And also a bonus of doing it with the airbrush and applying it in multiple layers means that I can add it thicker in areas that I want it to be more prominent, which is especially around the bottom of the legs and around the bottom of the cape. Then we want to give that around 15 to 20 minutes to dry, and then we can start to come in with our removal process. So with the removal process there's a reason that we've applied it a little bit thicker to start off with, and the main reason for that is obviously I want it to be a little bit more lived in, like I mentioned right at the beginning. Now the beauty of Goons Grime is that you know, it does have a slight, I mean a very slight granule texture to it, and I'm going to use this to my advantage when we start to do the removal process. Because we've added it thicker means we're going to get more of that like granule effect that I've just spoke about, and what I'm going to do is I want to try and push and manipulate that Goons Grime more into the recess areas to give it an even bigger build up of dirt and grime. But obviously with the application we've aided this by spraying multiple layers into areas that we want to naturally be darker. Now as you can see, usually I do recommend a Q-tip when it comes to the removal process of the Goons Grime, but I've got these little makeup sponges, and again this is to my advantage on the effects that I'm trying to create, but also it can be a disadvantage when coming to removing the actual Goons Grime itself. Sponges are fantastic, obviously they don't really leave much residue or like any little cotton fibres and stuff, but the problem is they do tend to soak up quite a lot of the Goons Grime, especially if you're trying to manipulate it in such a way that you want to leave some behind. Then obviously you need to take precautions. It's just that I've got used to them and I know how much pressure to put on. It's like a muscle memory thing, and this naturally just comes over time. But again, I would recommend starting off with the Q-tip, and then if you want to remove some more then you can use the sponges. But the reason the sponge is good for this technique and wanting to push it about is that the absorption of it, you can sort of like almost push it back out of the sponge, whereas when it's on a cotton Q-tip it's just there and it stays there. Yeah, you can manipulate it a little bit depending on how much mineral spirits you've got, but for this I've got very minimal mineral spirits again, so I'm not trying to remove too much of that granule and that Goons Grime away. What I'm trying to do is manipulate it and push it around, and because I've got my sponge dampened with the mineral spirits, that means I can start to manipulate it and push it into the recesses and some of the areas that I might want to be a little bit more clean at, like such as the cape at like the tops and stuff, or areas that you just really don't want too much of that build up. then you can start to add a little bit more mineral spirits and pull that away as you normally would with your reductive technique. Also, we did apply that oil scrubbing technique before, but don't worry too much about removing that off. If anything, what's going to happen is the goon's grime is going to go back in if it's going to reactivate it, and it's going to mix with that, and you're just going to get some more unique like dust and looking grime on your miniature. But obviously we've applied it really thin beforehand, so the goon's grime shouldn't and will not, depending on how much mineral spirits you've got on your Q-tip. And when you're done, you should be left with this in scale, really nice, dusty, awful looking, grimy armour that looks really lived in, and over the years this thing has just built up with dirt and grime. Now at this point in the painting process, it's a good time to start adding the rest of the details to your miniature, such as any highlights on all the metallic areas or any touch-ups that you might need to do onto your mini. But now what we're going to start to do is add some battle damage and also some difference in the surfaces. And for this I'm going to be using the soft pressing technique. Now we do cover this extensively on the soft pressing technique over on the Grimdark Compendium. But for this method, you know, excuse the pun, I'm only scratching the surface with the way that I'm using it and applying it in this video. And if anything, I'm a little bit more heavy-handed than the actual soft pressing technique. This is like a combination of like using the soft pressing technique, but I am getting a little bit heavy-handed in some areas, and this is all for a specific purpose. But first of all, I'm just working my way around using the soft pressing technique on the armor and just working my way around, and then with a like clean brush, make sure that you do get any like debris or anything like that off. Now the reason I'm going a little bit more heavy-handed, and obviously you can see I'm actually scratching on some places right down to the actual plastic itself. The marks themselves will appear a little bit more like whiter on the video and actually in person, but once you've dusted them off, they do actually fade off into the armor itself. So for the cape, this was rendered using multiple layers of the soft pressing technique, and for this I've just gone in there with some like different washes from Citadel or some contrast paints to create like splash and mud going up to his cape. And I also added some Abtalon 502 dust, thinned down with mineral spirits, and used it in like some streaks to add some further weathering to the bottom of the cape. But in between each one of those steps, I'm adding further layers of the soft pressing as I'm scratching through that next surface, then adding a new one and then scratching through that, and it's just a surface and layer upon layer which you can see through, which creates realistic textures, scratches on armor, which when applied correctly can create some amazing finishes on your surfaces. So the reason that I've actually gone a little bit deeper and scratched a little bit too hard down to the plastic is, one, because I want to create like an actual physical indentation which is deep enough for some like washers or some further enamels or anything to run into, and number two, it almost like peels back the paint a little bit, so around the edge of each one it gives you this like realistic like paint peel effect, which, you know, over the years this paint is naturally going to start to wear down a little bit. But any like other plastic that shows through is going to be coloured in and covered in with any further washers, or I use these with the metallic chips and start to add like metallic chips into them as though it's gone right down to the bare metal. A little bit later on in the weathering process, when I came in with the Dirty Downs rust just thinned down, I put a little bit of this into each one, creating a more battle worn and weathered overall look, which is what we said right at the beginning. I want to make this armor look lived in. The next part of the process that we need to apply to this miniature is to force surface finish variation, and there is no other better special effects enamel out there on the market at the moment to be able to do this. What I love is Ichor of the Damned. Now, you've seen the ways in which we use it within our Bestiarum course and for like flesh effects, but I actually really like to use it on armor and also like fabrics. So Ichor of the Damned is an enamel wash that is designed specifically to leave a satin finish. Now you can manipulate manipulate this a little bit further down to like a matte finish, depending on how much you thin it, and with the mineral spirits. Again, we're going to give it a good shake, and what I'm going to do is put some onto our palette as we taught in our previous video, and I'm going to thin this 2 parts thinner mineral spirits to 1 part Ichor of the Damned, and almost as in like a glaze, I'm going to start to glaze it in areas where I want to be a little bit more like glossy or on more of the satin side. And again, I thin this even further when it comes to putting it on the armor, and I tend to, on the armor places, I tend to put it in places around like rivets and areas that might have like oil dripping down on it, because again, it's going to push it back down and deepen those shadows, but you're also going to get that nice surface finish variation, and it can make some areas look a bit more like greasy and wet than others. Now the final thing we need to do to this miniature is paint the candles, and for this I've used Abtalon 502's Dust, and I'm just creating and painting them all on, and then I start to add these little lines as though the wax has started to drip and go down to the miniature. Naturally, we did do a little bit of pre-light wax with some UV resin, and I just tend to go in there and follow the lines, and then what I do once it's sort of like semi-dry, I tend to go on there with some more Taurian grime from Citadel, and I let it mix in with the oils. It's not like a good reaction, but the reaction you get from it is like this glossy, awful finish, which is perfect for candles and their wax. For the wax drips on some of the strands like we would when we're rust streaking, I just go in there with some mineral spirits and thin some of them down to give it a more of a natural appearance. For the base, if you decide to do the candle OSL, then do your OSL first and then paint your candles in after. The base itself was painted using a mix of various greys and stippled and dry brushed on, and then naturally, like we did with the miniature, we want to try and push surface finish variation and some different textures and tones onto the floor, and we've achieved that by using again our Goons grime and some Ichor of the Damned to get some different surface finish variation. After I painted some details, I also went and sprinkled on some natural like ground, some like earth, and I've fixed these in with a gravel and sand fixer, and to finish the base off I used some pigment powders and I dusted this all around the base and up onto the miniature's legs and the cape, which will then tie it into the base. So the base itself, it's got like these angle steps, and I've used them to position my character directly in the middle so that the focus is all on him, and as those steps open up it also goes in line with his arms opening up, and that's a specific stylized choice that I chose for this miniature. For when you look at it from its golden angle, everything just ties together. And that about wraps up this video, so I'd like to thank you for coming along and tuning into this video. If you could, it'd really help us out if you could just hit that like button and let us know what you think in the comment section below. Also, be sure to check out some of our other videos here over at the channel, and be sure to check out the grimdarkcompendium.com and see our latest courses. I've been Nate the Feral Painter, and until next time guys, I'll catch you in our next video.